Hey Dan, how you doing?
Hey, not too bad, Jen. How's it going over there in Australia?
It's beautiful actually. It's a sunny day. I'm looking at the beach. Things are wonderful when it turns into summer. How about in Michigan?
Well, it's the end of the year in Michigan, and it's actually pretty cold. So we don't have any snow at the moment, but that's only a momentary respite.
Amazing. Well, Christmas is coming up, so hopefully you get a white Christmas.
Well, that would be good. I could do without snow after that. But it is coming up on the end of the year here.
Yeah, so I thought we could have a conversation, a bit of a year in review conversation about 2021. And when we thought back and looked at the big stuff that's happened this year, I thought this is really the year that we all became system innovators. What do you think about
Yeah,
that?
it's really kind of amazing, isn't it? I mean, I feel like we have been so long, the man or the woman standing out in the middle of the field shouting into the wind. And you look around now and things are happening in ways that are being explained and dealt with as system things. It feels like the conversation is changing. That instead of the solutions being all proposed as, we need a new mobile app, or we need, to make some incremental improvement in things, people are beginning to talk about things as if they were about systems. They're talking about complex stuff as complex stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's always been a conversation about transport systems, education systems, governance systems. Some stuff just has the word system attached to it. But I feel like there's plenty of things that happened this year that not only made us understand what that actually means, like what does it mean to have an education system, but that made us realize that many of the big challenges in our world are actually based off the systems that underpin them. So, the most obvious being COVID, where so much of the conversation started with we need more masks, we need more ventilators, why aren't people wearing their masks? That needs to change. And then slowly you heard, or not even slowly, but you heard different conversations coming out about, well, it's not about the ventilators, it's actually the number of staff we have to run those ventilators. And the number of ventilators is linked with how many masks you have, is linked with the kind of health system, with the kind of hospital system you run, which is linked to the way that communities behave, their kind of attitudes. And so you started to see this really interesting conversation emerging in communities and at country and certainly international level around, so how do we fit these pieces together? If we wear masks, how does that affect our vaccination rates? And if we put these kind of changes in hospitals and staffing, how might that affect our ability to really save lives and change behaviour in communities? And so I thought it was just really interesting looking at how the conversation really started to shift from individual decisions and this kind of individual incremental change into, actually, you need to look at that bigger picture. You need to look at that system to come up with a strategy that's viable.
It's interesting, the current crisis of the moment is supply chains and the whole global supply chain challenge and failure. And in the past, I've always heard supply chains talked about as a very linear sort of thing. The factory makes the stuff, they put it on the truck, they put it on the boat, and da 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 da. And it just is, it follows along in a very neat stepwise fashion. You're finding the conversations now are beginning to recognize how many different pieces are going into that. It's the labor that's available at the port. It's where are the containers. It was who demanded the containers and what's the economics of filling up the containers? You know, there're just so many pieces that are not in a neat little chain, but really a whole tangled web. And I think it's exciting to hear people beginning to talk even in the press about that level of complexity. This isn't something that university, you know, PhDs are studying. This is something that people are having a real conversation about.
Yeah, and they had to, you know, with the Evergrande stuck in the middle of the canal, Suez Canal, you can't have that conversation about one boat which blocks the canal and how it affects global trade without talking about the ramifications. And that idea that, you know, our world is more closely linked together. And if our world is more closely linked together, then there is more underlying complexity in each of the kind of big challenges we face. And that complexity can't be kind of pushed under a rug or ignored, or, you know, we can no longer pretend that doesn't exist, because it does. And so, you know, if we're going to deal with the Evergrande, if we're going to deal with the issues of supply chain due to a global pandemic, then we need to talk about all of it. And we need to find a way to talk about these big challenges where we can have real conversation and that complexity doesn't overwhelm us.
You know, I think the corollary to this, and it's also really quite encouraging, that you're beginning to see people move beyond silver bullet solutions. You know, there was an awful long time, and, you know, having spent much of the last 10 years in, you know, technology companies where, you know, it pretty much didn't matter what problem you were being presented. The answer was going to be, we're going to run a workshop and then we're going to create a mobile app. And, you know, the proliferation of mobile apps and digital litter, you know, really became, you know, quite depressing after a while, because just so much effort and so much time was being put into these things. And, you know, they weren't addressing real problems. They weren't addressing the complexity of problems. And so I think it's quite exciting to see the solutions becoming more sophisticated, that you're beginning to see people say, well, if I want to address the problem that people can't get care in hospitals, I'm not going to simply like add more beds in a hospital. I'm going to look at expanding, you know, digital healthcare. I'm going to look at new models for providing and delivering healthcare. So I'm going to really stretch the possible toolkit that I can use. And I think that's one of the things about, you know, system innovation that I find so exciting is it gives you an opportunity to look beyond the mobile app. You know, it gives you the opportunity to look beyond the obvious, like, if you don't have enough masks, order more masks. You know, you get beyond those small silver bullet solutions to, you know, solutions that might have a sustained impact that could really change the game.
And I love this idea of moving past silver bullet solutions. And of course, there's some problems that are more simple or more well-defined, where, you know, it might be add a print button. It might be get a new dog collar. So, you know, I think there are some kind of easier problems to solve. But really, when you get into anything that's big and important in our world today, the big kind of opportunities, a mobile app is not going to change the world. A mobile app might be part of something that changes the world, might be part of a system that changes the world. And so I love how those innovation practices are starting to shift to recognize, you know, it's not all about the ideation workshop. It's not all about sitting in a room and coming up with a skateboard MVP, when really what you need to do is create a car. And you know what? You don't create a skateboard if you're creating a car. So,
yeah.
some of the exciting areas here, I think the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, have made kind of interesting inroads and investments. They've got countless labs around the world at a country level, which are called System Innovation Labs. And I think that's been really exciting to see, investing in at a country level. How do we look at water systems, climate change, governance, any kind of, implementing 3D printing as a solution to agriculture or something like that. So really taking that systems approach and taking the systems practice and saying, here's where we're going to make some big shifts globally. So starting to see that filter down, and not just through NGOs and businesses, but the UN, and it's really popping up all over the place.
Yeah, and I think that sort of drives to what I'm seeing as a third big trend, which is people are beginning to step up to the big, gnarly problems that, I think in some ways just seemed overwhelming before. Like if you think about climate change, that is a problem that requires multiple systems, multiple countries, multiple economic actors, multiple governmental actors. I mean, there's just so many pieces that go into it. And I think historically, the barriers to moving on climate change are often framed as, there's somebody who's unwilling to give up, or someone who's selfishly defending their right to ... But I think a more realistic assessment is it's just terribly complex. And my sense is that's beginning to shift now. People are stepping up to the complexity. They're willing to take on that scale of problem and, really begin to ask, all right, what does it take to make the entire world act differently? And, act differently across so many different dimensions. And you see the same sorts of things, I think, in education, where you're just getting these really big challenges that people have, I think, often seen as being insurmountable. Once you start saying, I can change the whole system, that I can work across systems, I think people are more willing to take on, really big, hard challenges rather than, throw up their hands in despair.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And Dan, I love it anytime you say gnarly problems because they're so exciting. But I think part of this, the year we all became systems innovators, I think part of this is having the tools to do that. Really having the ability to say, I have a methodology, I have a toolkit, and I have an approach to be able to deal with big, gnarly problems. So, there's been urgency around climate change for a long time. And I saw this year was the first year it rained in the summit region of Greenland, which is incredibly scary, raining on Greenland's like hinterland ice sheets. So that urgency is only getting louder and more important. The warnings are only getting greater. But then for me, it's about the how. It's about, okay, what do you do? What do you do here? And we saw the kind of climate summit and how messy it was. But I think systems innovation.
But it was good messy, right?
But it was good messy. Yeah. And it's
I mean,
okay to be messy.
That's the thing that I find exciting. I look at something like the climate summit and I said, boy, that was messy. And it feels like good news. Like, if your solution to this kind of problem isn't messy, then dude, you're not looking at the problem.
Yeah. And being able to step back and say, what are all the parts of this problem that exist in the real world? It's not some perfect problem that you can fit into a box that can be well defined. It is messy. And so, you know, often, Dan, you love drawing pictures, but stepping back and drawing a systems map, you know, stepping back and saying, here's all the actors, here's all the resources, here's the kind of activities, and being able to look around and say, this is how it happens in the real world. This is not a pretend run through. This is not a kind of beautiful visual. It is just the way it is. And so what do we work on here? So what are the areas of leverage? So whose motivations can we shift, or where can we get different kind of resource flows? And I think that those practical tools and dealing with the reality, which is messy, is what excites me.
Yeah, I think the ability to distill complexity and make it accessible to people rather than ignore it is one of the big shifts that make system innovation work. You know, because system innovation, you just can't do it alone. You can't be the guy in the basement, you know, with 3 friends who are going to, you know, invent something and then go get an IPO. System innovation is about like bringing all sorts of different folks together. And for that, you need some way of conveying, you know, what are the big complex systems and things and how they all fit together. So, you know, you say I like drawing diagrams, which is true, but I think it's also sort of a sign of the new tools. You know, these are not necessarily big computer systems to simulate how, you know, massively complex, you know, systems like the weather work. It's rather, instead of getting more and more and more complex and more pieces, it's really about distilling that complexity so you can see it.
And I think I couldn't agree more. And I think that allows you to embrace hard problems. And something else I think we're seeing more in 2021 is those who choose to embrace hard problems are the winners. So, you know, Elon Musk was just named Times Person of the Year. And he was named Times Person of the Year because he takes on really hard challenges all over the place, from, you know, disrupting the combustion engine to space flight to, you know, changing construction techniques and battery technology, and the list goes on, Neuralink and brain connections. But those who are not shying away from big, hard problems and rather saying, I have ways to deal with this piece by piece. You know, I'm not going to create this year and take over the market, electric cars and diesel. I'm going to take on a hard problem, and this is a long road, and I'm going to work on it. But that will mean that I'm the winner. That will mean that I can full impact and increase. Dan, did I cut out?
Yeah, you cut out for the last bit on Elon. Are you there?
Okay. Should I say that again? I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can now. Yeah, sure. If you want, go. You can loop back to that. Oh, now you're frozen again.
Something. Oh, say that again. I think it's recording on my computer, so I'm hoping that it should be fine. But I'll say it again, and then we can move on.
Okay.
Cool. Something that I'm really excited about when you talk about embracing harder problems is that those who are winning, those who are creating huge value and huge impacts, are those who are embracing harder problems and finding the simplicity in them. So Elon Musk was just named Times Person of the Year specifically because of that. You know, you could say he's the richest person in the world, and you know, he's changed the car industry forever. But really, he's taken on the combustion engine, space flight, construction methods, battery technology, you know, a brain link to technology and just about everything else in between. And he's saying, I'm not going to shy away from these hard problems. I'm going to work out how we find the system behind them. I'm going to work out how we find that simplicity. And I'm not going to say tomorrow the world is going to take on electric vehicles, but over time, over kind of pivots and thin slices, actually this year there were more electric cars than diesel cars. So embracing those hard problems, you can just create so much more change, so much more value than the kind of incremental work we've seen before.
You know, one of the things that's exciting about this year too, although maybe that's exciting in quote marks, is that so many legacy systems, so many of the things that have defined the way the world works have really taken a beating. And, you know, COVID is certainly a big part of this. You know, COVID didn't only stress healthcare, you know, it stressed education, and it redefined, you know, what work needed to be about, because all of a sudden, you know, we couldn't all go into the office together. And so, you know, if we're looking at like, why did we all become system innovators this year? Partly it's because we broke a lot of our old systems and we needed to replace them with something new. And, you know, once you've broken a system, it very, very seldom goes back to the way it was. You know, if we look at the whole, you know, shift in the way of work, where we have, you know, people having spent a year basically in many cases doing remote work in the office. And now as people consider the possibility of going back, ignoring the whole question of, you know, continued risk of COVID, you know, a lot of people have moved out of state. A lot of people have realized I can have the job of my dreams and I don't have to move to a different city, or I can have an entirely more flexible schedule. I mean, you and I are really an interesting example. We haven't seen each other in a couple of years, actually face to face, and we live on opposite sides of the globes, and yet we partner on this thing of system innovation. The ability to break an old system and then put something new in its place, I think is, you know, one of the things that creates unique opportunities and moments of history. And we did a lot of system breaking this year. So it feels like, while traumatic in many, many ways, this is pretty good. I mean, this is good if you want to reinvent the world.
It's a really good perspective. And I think before this year, you can find a broken system just about anywhere, or maybe that's what I'm good at, but I find broken systems a lot of places.
Yeah, you do spend a lot of your times. Yeah.
But you walk into any organization and say, so what's wrong here? Walk into any kind of country and say, why isn't this working in a community? But yeah, I do spend a lot of my time in global emergencies, which there's a lot of broken systems. But I think COVID caused not only systems to crack, but some of that change, some of that movement, which has been happening so fast for a period, became more obvious. And I think, you know, the adage, well, the world is changing faster than ever before, continues. And so that the breaking of systems and the opportunities within systems that break are only getting bigger. I remember reading that, you know, 10 years ago, the education system going online was meant to quadruple, you know, in the next 10 years, and that didn't happen. And now the prediction is that the online education will quadruple by 2026, because we've seen this huge shift in people wanting more education, more personalized education online. I think remote work isn't just about remote work, but it's about how do you access the skills you need all over the world, and how do you create value in those areas. So these breaking systems are only the start of a waterfall of opportunity that opens up for entrepreneurs and businesses to say, okay, how do we leverage this? I mean, I love the other piece that we saw change significantly this year was the freezing of assets. So, you know, Uber unfroze the car and Airbnb unfroze the house. And there's been so much discussion about how new tech like NFTs, non-fungible tokens in the crypto blockchain area are unfreezing creative assets. You know, suddenly creative people can get paid for what they do, and therefore they have more time to spend on these creative endeavors. So all kinds of different assets that are being unblocked by broken systems or opportunities in those broken systems.
You know, it's interesting to imagine if there hadn't been COVID, how we would have viewed 2021. Like, would we have still thought this was a year where everybody became system innovators? And I think the answer is probably maybe yes, because in the background of all this, and you know, you mentioned blockchain and other new technologies, there already was this huge wave of potential technical revolution. You know, the fourth industrial revolution, which really wasn't about one set of technologies, but just a whole web of technologies. You know, Internet of Things providing information about the world anywhere and every place. You know, cloud connecting that together to create big data sets, which were then tied to artificial intelligence, which could then make choices, which could guide, you know, real action in the world by robots, by drones, by, you know, maker technology. And so you have really waiting in the wings right now, this newly empowered ecosystem of technologies that when you start pairing them up with, you know, businesses, when you pair them up with people, when you pair them up with communities and organizations, the potential to put together stuff that's just, you know, Star Trek, heck, that's nothing. You know, we're going to be able to imagine just amazing things that create value in our lives, and that, you know, really use technology to do things differently, not simply to, you know, make a particular task easier or to, you know, make something more efficient, but really to, you know, once again, you know, transform the way we live and act in the world by bringing all of these technologies together.
Yeah, and I think this is critical. You know, if you're a company or an individual who is still focused around that incremental change, while, you know, the world's first 3D printed school opened in Malawi, the first time we could connect a human brain wirelessly to a computer with people using, you know, fake arms by thinking I'd like to move my arm. These huge changes in technology and the way we live first being tested this year and will continue to grow as the technology matures. It's not enough not to look at the bigger picture. It's not enough not to look at that whole system and say, what are the big opportunities and what do I need to do here? You still need to do incremental change as kind of any organization, but you have to be focused on the bigger opportunities and bigger value that you or your organization can create in the world.
And I think in the past, people saw many of those bigger opportunities as like an invention, like I'm going to invent the ...
mm,
And increasingly, I think it's going to be the system. This is the
mm,
system that we're making. And it's
mm,
going to, going back to your point earlier on, it's going to have multiple pieces of technology, but
mm,
it's not just technology. It's going to be like the Borg. It's going to be
mm,
technology and humans and
mm,
organizations. And once you start allowing yourself to create at that level, there's going to be so much that can be done. And
mm,
you're going to be able to do it with people from all over the world, which I think is particularly
mm,
exciting.
mm. The I read this morning that it's possible this week or in the next couple of weeks, Apple's going to hit $3 trillion. It will become the first $3 trillion company, and that's based on Tim Cook's push towards owning ecosystems. And I think there's a story there about how big companies can certainly build and grow ecosystems. But I think the other story behind that is how many ecosystem players Apple has in creating a range of new kind of interesting things in the App Store, interesting tech, interesting support to the various kind of Apple platforms and products. And that becomes really exciting because it's not just individual products anymore, it's ecosystems of actors. So how to entrepreneurs, people, communities, organizations start to see themselves within an ecosystem that they can shift and build on and create greater value or impact. This whole idea of not just the tech disruption and not just seeing individual systems that you're going to interact with, but seeing yourself as an ecosystem player.
Yeah. And I think it's exciting to think that this isn't something that's just about a commercial play.
No.
It's something that can help deal with, hard problems in communities that, have very fragile and difficult systems. There's still systems there. And therefore you can spend creative energy around how you change and improve those systems. It's one of those very democratic forms of innovation, in the sense that systems are everywhere and anyone can potentially be this system innovator. So that's as we go into 2022, that's really what excites me, is there's just so much potential here to embrace big problems, to bring a systems mindset to how you create the solutions, and to leverage this huge toolbox that we've been given to come up with something new that replaces these big broken systems that we've got.
So Dan, if I was to ask you, why is it important to get into systems innovation now? What would you say?
I would say in 2022, when we slide into the next year in the next few weeks, if you want to do something that matters, whether that's it matters to your business, it matters to your community, or it matters on the global stage like climate change, the path to doing that is going to be using a systems mindset to reimagine the way systems work, what we call system innovation. And I think that's the biggest reason. If you want to do something that's big, cool, and impactful, this is how you're going to be able to do it.
I love that so much. I'm going to slightly shift that I'm not sliding into the new year, but I might be leaping.
All right, fine. Leap away and we'll see how 2022 comes out.
Great. I hope everyone that's listening has enjoyed this. You can follow us on inno.ecosystem, inno_ecosystem. You can go to our website at innovationecosystem.com. Check either of us out on LinkedIn or Twitter, and we hope you have a good 2022.
And being a system innovator, it's really a cool thing.
That's it. Thanks, Dan. Have a good day.
Bye-bye, Jen.